The stage lights of America's Got Talent glimmered brightly as a thin Filipino boy slowly walked forward, clutching the microphone as if it were his only source of strength. His clothes were faded, his shoes scuffed and clearly too large for his feet. From the moment he stepped into view, a ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Some audience members exchanged amused glances, while others let out quiet laughs, judging him instantly by his appearance. To many, he looked too timid, too fragile, certainly not someone who could command a stage this grand. The boy took a shaky breath as the judges looked him over. Simon Cowell leaned slightly back in his chair, his expression skeptical. Heidi raised her brows with curiosity, and Sophia offered a small, polite smile, though doubt lingered in her eyes. When asked where he came from, the boy spoke softly, "I am from the Philippines. I sing on the streets to help my family." His accent was thick, his words humble, and though the arena was filled with thousands of people, he seemed so very small. Instead of sympathy, the crowd buzzed with disbelief. Could this poor, nervous child really perform on one of the world's biggest stages? Some smirked, others prepared themselves for what they assumed would be an embarrassing moment. Yet behind his trembling hands and quiet voice was a determination no one yet recognized. He had carried his dream across oceans, his hardships carved deep into his soul, and though the world saw only a poor boy in ragged clothes, he knew he had something they could not ignore. He closed his eyes, tightened his grip on the mic, and braced himself to sing. The room fell silent as the backing music began to play. The boy stood frozen for a moment, staring down at the floor, his small hands trembling against the microphone. The judges leaned forward, unsure if he would even be able to start. Then, with a deep breath, he lifted his head and released his first note. What followed silenced every whisper, every chuckle, every doubt. His voice soared, clear, soulful, and powerful beyond his years. It wasn't just singing, it was emotion poured into sound. The lyrics carried a story of struggle and longing, and every word seemed to echo the hardships he had endured on the streets of Manila. The sound was raw, unpolished yet perfect in its honesty. The audience, who moments earlier had doubted him, sat in shock. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, and the mocking expressions melted into awe. Camera flashes caught the tearful reactions of people in the front rows, some covering their mouths, others clasping their hands as if witnessing something holy. Even the judges were taken aback. Heidi's eyes glistened, Sophia leaned forward with her hand on her chest, and Simon, known for his iron composure, blinked slowly, trying to process what he was hearing. As the boy reached the chorus, his voice grew even stronger, filling the massive theater as if it had been waiting for him all along. Each note carried not just talent, but resilience, the kind born only from hardship and hope. It was no longer the voice of a poor street child, it was the voice of a star in the making. The audience was no longer laughing. They were transfixed, hanging on to every sound that poured from his soul. By the time the boy reached the heart of the song, the entire theater was transformed. No one dared to speak, the audience was locked in a trance, carried by the raw emotion of his voice. His small figure on stage seemed almost swallowed by the massive lights, yet his presence grew with every note. He closed his eyes tightly, singing as though he were releasing every ounce of pain, every hidden dream, every prayer he had ever whispered under the night sky. The judges, too, could no longer contain themselves. Heidi rested her hand on her chest, her eyes glassy with tears. Sophia tilted her head, visibly moved, whispering, "This is incredible." Howie leaned closer to the desk, shaking his head in disbelief at the power coming from someone so young. But the most shocking moment came from Simon. The man who rarely showed emotion had tears welling in his eyes. He wiped at them discreetly, but the cameras caught it, the audience saw it, and the theater erupted in gasps. Every note hit deeper than the last. The boy's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from overwhelming emotion. That imperfection only made his performance more real, more human. The crowd that had once mocked him was now crying, cheering softly, holding their breath as if not to miss a single second. Parents held their children closer, strangers exchanged knowing looks, and the atmosphere was heavy with shared emotion. For the boy, it was not just a performance, it was his story, sung through the pain of poverty, the loneliness of the streets, and the hope that music could change his life. And on that stage, in front of the world, he was no longer invisible. His voice had made even the harshest critics weep. As the boy reached the final note, he held it longer than anyone expected, his voice soaring across the vast theater like a cry of triumph. The music faded, and for a moment, silence hung in the air. He lowered the microphone slowly, his shoulders trembling with the weight of what he had just poured out. For one terrifying second, he thought perhaps the crowd hadn't understood him. Then it happened. The entire auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. The audience leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, and whistling louder than they had all night. Some shouted his name, others simply screamed in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. People were wiping their eyes, hugging one another, overwhelmed by the raw power of his performance. It wasn't just a standing ovation, it was an outpouring of love, a moment that made everyone forget how they had judged him just minutes earlier. On the judges' panel, Heidi stood first, clapping with tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophia joined her, her smile wide with admiration, her eyes red from crying. Howie looked almost stunned, shaking his head with a grin as if he couldn't believe such a voice had come from such a small boy. And then, Simon stood. His slow rise from the chair was met with gasps from the audience. He rarely gave standing ovations. But tonight was different. Simon's eyes glistened with emotion as he clapped firmly, never looking away from the boy who had just proved everyone wrong. The boy covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed, his body trembling with gratitude and disbelief. In that moment, he was no longer the poor Filipino boy in ragged clothes, he was a star, standing tall under the lights as the world cheered for him. The applause thundered on, filling every corner of the theater as the boy stood trembling under the stage lights. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his small hands still clutching the microphone as tears streamed down his cheeks. He had dreamed of this moment but never imagined it would feel so overwhelming. The judges tried to compose themselves, each of them visibly moved. Heidi leaned forward, her voice warm and emotional, telling him that his performance was one of the most beautiful she had ever heard. Sophia nodded in agreement, saying that his voice was a gift that touched souls. Then Simon spoke, his tone softer than usual, his words heavy with sincerity. "You've not only proved us wrong," he said, his eyes glistening, "you've reminded us why we do this show." That was unforgettable. The audience roared in approval, their cheers echoing like a wave of support. Howie sat quietly for a moment, studying the boy with a look of pride. Then, with a smile, he pressed the golden buzzer. The crowd exploded. Golden confetti burst from the ceiling, raining down in shimmering streams. The boy dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the stage transformed into a glowing dream. The judges rushed to him, embracing him in a moment of pure celebration. The boy lifted his face toward the lights, his tears mixing with the golden sparkle, as if heaven itself was blessing him. What began with laughter and mockery had ended in triumph and tears. The poor Filipino boy who had once sung on the streets was now on the world's biggest stage, his voice carrying him toward a brighter future. That night, he didn't just win a golden buzzer, he won the hearts of millions.